The waves crashed against the rocky shore, the salty spray stinging his eyes as he stumbled through the darkness. Clutching the lantern in his trembling hand, the reclusive man hurried down the winding path, his heart pounding in his chest. There, just ahead, a crumpled figure lay motionless on the sand. A woman, her tattered clothes stained with blood. Without a moment's hesitation, he rushed to her side, kneeling beside the unconscious stranger. Gently, he cradled her head, his fingers brushing against her tangled, windswept hair. She was alive, but barely. He had to act quickly. Tearing a strip from his shirt, he pressed the makeshift bandage against the deep gash on her arm, stemming the steady flow of blood. Then, with a strength he didn't know he possessed, he lifted her limp form and carried her back to his modest cottage, the flickering lantern guiding his way. Once inside, he laid the woman on his bed, hastily gathering clean water and fresh linens. As he tended to her wounds, his mind raced, consumed by questions. Who was she? How had she come to be in such a state, alone on the beach in the dead of night? And why did he feel this inexplicable urge to help her, a complete stranger? The hours ticked by, and as the first golden rays of dawn peeked over the horizon, the woman's eyes fluttered open. She stared at him, a mix of confusion and gratitude in her gaze. "Where am I?" she rasped, her voice barely above a whisper. "You're safe, in my home," he replied, his voice gentle. "I found you on the beach, wounded. Can you tell me what happened?" The woman's eyes widened, and she struggled to sit up, wincing in pain. I was attacked. My ship, it was sunk." She paused, swallowing hard. "I'm a pirate, you see, and there are those who would see me dead." The man's heart skipped a beat, but he forced himself to remain calm. A pirate in his home. He should have been terrified, but somehow he felt only a deep sense of sympathy for this wounded, vulnerable woman. "Rest now," he said, gently pushing her back down onto the bed. "You're safe here. I'll tend to your wounds, and then we can discuss what to do next." The woman nodded weakly, her eyelids already growing heavy. As she drifted off to sleep, the man couldn't help but wonder what he had gotten himself into. He had always been a solitary man, content to live out his days in quiet solitude, far from the turmoil of the outside world. But now, it seemed, he had been drawn into a dangerous web of intrigue and deception, all because of his simple act of kindness towards a stranger. The next morning, the man awoke to a deafening cacophony of voices and the thunderous rumble of ships' cannons. Rushing to the window, he stared in disbelief at the sight that unfolded before him. Anchored in the harbor, as far as the eye could see, were hundreds of ships, magnificent, towering vessels, flying the infamous black flag of the pirates.
Thousands of men swarmed the docks, their swords and muskets glinting in the sunlight. It was an armada, a force of such staggering size and power that the man felt his knees tremble. And then he remembered the wounded woman sleeping in his bed. Had she somehow led them here? Was this his punishment for daring to harbor a pirate? Steeling his nerves, he crept back to the bedroom, only to find the woman already awake, her eyes wide with fear. "They've come for me," she whispered, her voice laced with dread. "My enemies, they've tracked me here. I've put you in grave danger, and for that, I am truly sorry." The man shook his head, his mind racing. What do they want? Why are they here? The woman's gaze darkened. "They seek a legendary treasure, one that I'm said to have hidden away. They'll stop at nothing to find it, even if it means destroying this entire town." A chill ran down the man's spine. Treasure. He had always heard whispers of a great hoard buried somewhere along the coast, but he had dismissed them as mere rumors. Now, it seemed, those rumors had drawn the attention of the most fearsome pirates in all the 7 seas. "What can we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. The woman's expression hardened. "We must find a way to escape before they tear this place apart. I can't let my enemies get their hands on that treasure. It would bring untold devastation to the world." The man nodded, his mind racing. Escape? But how? The town was already surrounded, and the sheer number of pirates made any attempt at fleeing seem utterly hopeless. Just then, a thunderous knock echoed through the cottage, and the man's heart nearly stopped. They had been discovered. Steeling his nerves, he slowly opened the door, only to find himself staring down the barrel of a musket held by a weathered, scarred pirate with a gaze that seemed to bore into his very soul. "Where is she?" the pirate growled, his voice low and menacing. The man hesitated, his mind scrambling for a response. But before he could utter a word, the pirate woman appeared at his side, her expression resolute. "I'm here, Blackheart," she said, her voice surprisingly calm. "What do you want with me?" The pirate's lips curled into a sinister grin. "The treasure, of course. We know you have it hidden away, and we'll tear this town apart until we find it." The woman's eyes narrowed. "He'll never tell you where it is. The power of that hoard must never fall into the hands of the likes of you." Blackheart let out a harsh laugh. "Then you leave me no choice. Either you reveal the treasure's location, or we'll burn this place to the ground with you and your friend inside." The man's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, trapped between the towering pirate and the wounded woman whose life he had saved. He had been drawn into a deadly game of high-stakes intrigue, and he had no idea how to escape.
As the pirate armada continued its relentless assault on the town, the man knew that time was running out. He had to find a way to outwit these ruthless criminals, to protect the woman and the mysterious treasure they both sought to keep hidden. But with the odds stacked so heavily against him, how could he possibly succeed? The man's heart pounded in his chest as he stood there, trapped between the towering pirate and the wounded woman whose life he had saved. He had been drawn into a deadly game of high-stakes intrigue, and he had no idea how to escape. As the pirate armada continued its relentless assault on the town, the man knew that time was running out. He had to find a way to outwit these ruthless criminals, to protect the woman and the mysterious treasure they both sought to keep hidden. But with the odds stacked so heavily against him, how could he possibly succeed? Suddenly, a thunderous explosion rocked the cottage, sending debris and shards of glass flying in all directions. The man ducked, shielding his face as the shock wave tore through the room. When the dust settled, he looked up in horror to see that the pirate, Blackheart, had been thrown against the wall, his musket clattering to the floor. But it was the woman's condition that truly horrified the man. She lay motionless on the bed, a large shard of glass protruding from her chest, crimson blood staining the sheets around her. "No!" the man cried, rushing to her side. He pressed his hands against the wound, desperately trying to stem the bleeding, but it was no use. The woman's eyes were already glazing over, her breath coming in ragged gasps. Sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "The treasure must be protected." Her hand trembled as she reached into her shirt, pulling out a small, battered map. "Take this," she said, pressing it into the man's palm. "Find it before they do." The man stared at the map, his mind reeling. The treasure, the one that had drawn these ruthless pirates to this town, was now in his possession. But at what cost? He had never wanted to be a part of this, yet fate had thrust him into the middle of a deadly battle for an untold fortune. As the woman's eyes fluttered closed, the man felt a surge of rage and grief wash over him. How dare these pirates invade his peaceful life, bringing death and destruction in their wake? He would not let the woman's sacrifice be in vain. Turning to face Blackheart, who was still struggling to regain his footing, the man's expression hardened. "You killed her," he growled, his voice laced with venom. "And now you'll pay." Blackheart let out a low, menacing chuckle. "So the little mouse has some fight in him after all. But do you really think you stand a chance against the likes of me?" The man glanced down at the map in his hand, then back at the pirate. "I'm going to find that treasure," he said, his voice steady, "and I'm going to use it to destroy you and your entire cursed crew."
Blackheart's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in anger. "You fool," he roared. "Do you have any idea what kind of power you're nuddling with?" The man felt a surge of reckless courage. "I don't care," he spat. "All I know is that you and your kind have brought nothing but death and misery to this town, and I won't let you get your hands on that treasure, no matter what it takes." With that, he turned and fled the cottage, clutching the map tightly in his hand. He had to find a way to escape, to hide the treasure and keep it from falling into the wrong hands. But as he raced through the chaos of the town, he couldn't shake the image of the woman's lifeless body, her sacrifice haunting him with every step. The man ran until he reached the edge of the cliffs, the crashing waves below beckoning him. He knew he couldn't stay here, not with the pirates scouring the town for the treasure. But where could he go? And what would he do with the power that now lay in his hands? Suddenly, a flash of movement in the shadows caught his eye. Whirling around, the man found himself face to face with a young woman, her eyes wide with fear. "Please," she whispered, "you have to help me. They're coming for me too." The man stared at her, his mind racing. Could he trust her? Was she another pawn in this deadly game, or a potential ally in his fight against the pirates? Before he could respond, a thunderous roar echoed through the night, and the man's blood ran cold. Blackheart and his men had tracked him down, their muskets and swords gleaming in the moonlight. "There he is," the pirate captain bellowed, pointing directly at the man. "And he's got the map. Get him, you dogs." The man clutched the map tightly, his heart pounding in his chest. He had to get away, had to find a way to escape these relentless pursuers. But as the pirates closed in, he knew his options were running out. Turning to the young woman, he made a split-second decision. "Follow me," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And don't let go of my hand, no matter what happens." Without a moment's hesitation, he grabbed her wrist and plunged off the edge of the cliff, the two of them hurtling towards the crashing waves below. The woman let out a terrified scream, but the man held her tight, praying that they would somehow survive the perilous leap. As they hit the water, the man felt the air knocked from his lungs, the icy waves enveloping them in a deafening roar. He struggled to keep his grip on the woman, kicking desperately towards the surface. Just when he thought they would be dragged under, his head broke through the water and he gasped for air. Pulling the woman close, he scanned the shore, looking for any sign of their pursuers. To his relief, the pirates seemed to have lost sight of them, their shouts and curses fading into the distance. "Are you all right?" the man asked, his voice ragged. The woman nodded, coughing up seawater. I think so."
But what are we going to do now? The man glanced down at the soaked map in his hand, its edges starting to curl. "We're going to find that treasure," he said, his expression grim, "and we're going to use it to stop those pirates, no matter what it takes." The woman stared at him, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and determination. "You're serious, aren't you? You're really going to try and take on Blackheart and his entire crew?" The man nodded, his jaw set with resolve. "I have to," he said, "for the woman who died trying to protect this treasure, and for everyone in this town who suffered because of these pirates. I won't let their sacrifice be in vain." The woman searched his face, her expression shifting to one of understanding. "Then I'm with you," she said, her voice steady. "Whatever it takes, we'll find that treasure and stop those monsters." The man felt a surge of gratitude, and he knew in that moment that he had found an unexpected ally in this perilous quest. Together, they would face the unknown, guided by the map and driven by a desire for justice that burned brighter than the pirates' thirst for power. As they swam towards the shore, the man couldn't help but wonder what other surprises and challenges lay in store. But one thing was certain, the stakes had never been higher, and the fate of the entire town, and perhaps even the world, now rested on their shoulders. Here is a new chapter of approximately 1,600 words that continues the story with a shocking plot twist. The waves crashed against the rocks as the man and the young woman made their way along the shore, dripping wet and shivering from their daring escape. The man clutched the tattered map in his hand, his eyes fixed on the horizon, searching for any sign of their pursuers. "Do you really think we lost them?" the woman asked, her voice trembling. The man shook his head. "I'm not sure. Those pirates are relentless. They won't stop until they find that treasure." He paused, his gaze darkening. "And now it's in our hands." The woman looked at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of fear and resolve. "So what do we do? Where do we go from here?" The man took a deep breath, his mind racing. "We have to find a way to hide the treasure, to keep it out of their hands. But we can't just run and hide. We have to find a way to stop them once and for all." "But how?"
the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Those pirates, they have an entire armada. What chance do we have against that kind of power?" The man's jaw tightened. "I don't know," he admitted, "but I have to try. I can't let that woman's sacrifice be in vain, and I won't let those monsters terrorize this town any longer." They trudged on in silence, the sound of the waves and the distant rumble of cannon fire the only accompaniment to their steps. As they rounded a bend in the coastline, the man's eyes widened in shock. There, in the distance, was a massive vessel, its sails billowing in the wind.
But this was no ordinary ship. It was a magnificent three-masted galleon, its hull adorned with intricate carvings and gleaming brass fittings. "What is that?" the woman breathed, her gaze fixed on the impressive sight. The man felt a shiver run down his spine. "That's no pirate ship," he murmured. "That's a warship, a ship of the Royal Navy." The woman's eyes widened. "The Navy? But what are they doing here?" The man's mind raced. Could this be the answer to their prayers? Or was it simply another obstacle in their path? He gripped the map tighter, his knuckles turning white. "I don't know," he said, his voice tense, "but we have to get to that ship before the pirates do." Without another word, they set off, their steps quickening as they drew closer to the impressive vessel. As they approached, they could see the crew scurrying about the deck, their uniforms crisp and their movements disciplined. The man took a deep breath and stepped forward, the woman following close behind. "Excuse me," he called out, his voice wavering slightly. "We need to speak with the captain. It's a matter of life and death." A burly sailor turned to face them, his expression skeptical. "The captain's a busy man," he growled. "What's your business?" The man hesitated, unsure of how much to reveal. We have information that could help stop the pirates who are attacking this town," he said, his voice low. "It's urgent that we speak with him." The sailor eyed them warily, then turned and barked an order. Within moments, a tall, imposing figure emerged from the cabin, his uniform crisp and his gaze sharp. "What's all this commotion?" the captain demanded, his voice authoritative. The man stepped forward, his heart pounding. "Sir, we have information that could help you stop the pirates. They're after a legendary treasure, and we know where it's hidden." The captain's eyes widened, and he motioned for the man and the woman to follow him. Once they were inside the cabin, he turned to them, his expression serious. "Speak quickly," he said. "What do you know about this treasure?" The man explained everything, the woman he had found on the beach, the map she had given him, and the pirates' relentless pursuit. The captain listened intently, his brow furrowed in concentration. "This is indeed a grave matter," he said, once the man had finished. "If this treasure is as powerful as you say, we must keep it out of the hands of those scoundrels at all costs." He paused, his gaze settling on the map in the man's hand. "May I?" he asked, extending his hand. The man hesitated for a moment, then placed the map in the captain's outstretched palm. The captain unrolled it, his eyes scanning the faded parchment. This seems to indicate a small cove, not far from here," he murmured, his finger tracing the map. "If we move quickly, we may be able to reach it before the pirates do." The man felt a surge of hope. "Then you'll help us?" he asked, his voice eager. The captain nodded, his expression grim. "I cannot in good conscience allow this treasure to fall into the hands of those scoundrels. We must do everything in our power to protect it." He turned to one of his officers who was standing nearby. "Prepare the men for an immediate departure," he ordered. "We sail for the cove at once." The officer saluted and hurried away, and the captain turned his attention back to the man and the woman. "Now," he said, his voice low, "tell me more about this treasure. What kind of power does it hold?" The man hesitated, unsure of how much he should reveal. "I'm not entirely sure," he admitted. "The woman who gave me the map said that it must be protected at all costs, that its power could bring untold devastation to the world." The captain's brow furrowed. That is indeed troubling. We must be extremely careful in how we handle this." He paused, his gaze narrowing. "Tell me, do you know why the pirates are so desperate to get their hands on this treasure?" The man shook his head. "No, I don't," the woman didn't say. The captain's expression darkened. "I have a suspicion," he said, his voice low. "And if I'm right, then we may be facing a threat far greater than we ever imagined." The man felt a chill run down his spine. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. The captain leaned forward, his eyes intense. What if this treasure has the power to control the very forces of nature itself? What if it could be used to unleash untold destruction upon the world? The man's blood ran cold. Control the forces of nature? He breathed. You mean, like weather or earthquakes or... The captain nodded grimly. Precisely. And if the pirates were to get their hands on it, they could wreak havoc on a scale that would make their current plundering seem like child's play. The woman let out a horrified gasp. Then we have to stop them, she said, her voice shaking. We have to make sure that treasure never falls into their hands. The captain's gaze was steely. That is precisely what we intend to do, he said, but we must move quickly and with the utmost caution. The fate of the world may very well hang in the balance. As the ship set sail, the man and the woman stood on the deck, watching the shoreline disappear into the distance. The captain's words had shaken them to the core, and they both knew that the challenge they now faced was greater than anything they could have imagined. The man clutched the map in his hand, his mind racing. If the captain was right, and this treasure truly had the power to control the forces of nature, then the stakes had just been raised exponentially. The fate of the entire world was now in their hands. As the ship cut through the waves, the man couldn't help but wonder what other surprises and challenges lay in store. One thing was certain. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger and uncertainty, and the outcome would have far-reaching consequences that none of them could possibly foresee. The man turned to the woman, his expression grim. "Are you ready for this?" he asked, his voice low. The woman's eyes were resolute. "I have to be," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We don't have a choice. We have to stop those pirates, no matter what it takes." The man nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then let's do this," he said, his voice steady. "For the sake of the world, we can't afford to fail." As the ship pressed on towards its destination, the man couldn't shake the feeling that they were about to embark on a journey that would change the course of history forever. The stakes had never been higher, and the consequences of failure were unthinkable. But with the captain's guidance and the woman's unwavering determination, he knew that they had a chance to protect the world from a power so vast and so terrifying that it could bring about the end of everything they knew. The only question that remained was whether they would be able to reach the treasure before the pirates did, and whether they would have the strength and the courage to wield it for the greater good. Here is a new chapter, approximately 1,600 words, that continues the events and introduces a shocking plot twist. The ship's sails billowed in the wind as it raced across the choppy waves, the man and the woman clutching the railing as they stared intently at the horizon. The captain had gathered them in his quarters, his expression grave. "We're close," he said, unrolling the tattered map. "The cove where the treasure is hidden should be just up ahead." The man felt a knot of tension in his stomach. After everything they'd been through, the thought of finally reaching the treasure filled him with a mix of hope and dread. "What do you think we'll find there?" the woman asked, her voice tight with anxiety. The captain shook his head. "I wish I knew," he admitted. "But if the legends are true, we could be facing a power beyond our wildest imaginings." Just then, a shout rang out from the crow's nest. "Ship on the horizon, approaching fast!" The captain's eyes narrowed. "Raise the colors and prepare the cannons," he ordered. "It seems our pirate friends have caught up with us." The crew sprang into action, the air thick with the sounds of creaking ropes and barked commands. The man and the woman watched in tense silence as the opposing vessel drew closer, its black sails cutting an ominous silhouette against the sky. "Blackheart," the man breathed, his grip tightening on the railing. The captain placed a hand on his shoulder. "Stay close to me," he said, his voice low. "We'll need your help to navigate the cove." As the pirate ship drew within range, the captain raised his hand, his voice booming across the water.
"This is the HMS Valiant. Stand down and surrender, or be destroyed." In response, a thunderous roar erupted from the pirate vessel, and a volley of cannon fire rained down on the Valiant. The man and the woman ducked instinctively as the air filled with the deafening crash of splintering wood and the acrid smell of gunpowder. "Return fire!" the captain bellowed, his face etched with grim determination. The Valiant's cannons roared to life, its heavy shot pummeling the pirate ship's hull. The two vessels traded blows, the sound of battle echoing across the waves.
Amid the chaos, the man caught a glimpse of Blackheart, his face twisted with rage as he barked orders to his crew. Clutching the map in his hand, the man knew they had to reach the cove before the pirates did, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a deafening explosion rocked the Valiant, sending the man and the woman reeling. The captain steadied them, his face etched with concern. "They've breached the hull," he said, his voice tight. "We're taking on water." The man's heart sank. "What do we do?" he asked, his voice trembling. The captain's expression hardened. "We have to get to that cove, no matter what. If the treasure is as powerful as you say, we can't let it fall into the pirates' hands." He turned to one of his officers. "Prepare the longboat," he ordered. "I'll take the map and a small crew to the cove. The rest of you, hold off the pirates as long as you can." The officer saluted, his face grim, and hurried off to carry out the captain's orders. The man and the woman exchanged a worried glance, their nerves fraying with each passing moment. "Are you sure you can trust him?" the woman asked, her voice low. "What if he tries to keep the treasure for himself?" The man shook his head. "I don't think the captain is the type to betray us," he said, his voice resolute. "He knows what's at stake, and he's willing to risk everything to stop the pirates." The woman nodded, her expression tense. "Then I'm going with you," she said, her voice firm. "I can't just sit here and wait for the end." The man hesitated, his brow furrowed with concern. "It's going to be dangerous," he warned. "Are you sure you're up for it?" The woman's eyes narrowed, her jaw set with determination. "I've come too far to back down now," she said. "Whatever happens, I'm in this with you until the end." The man nodded, a glimmer of admiration in his gaze. "Then let's go," he said, his voice low. As the longboat was lowered into the churning water, the man and the woman climbed aboard, their hearts pounding with a mix of fear and resolve. The captain joined them, his expression grim. "Remember," he said, his voice stern, "the treasure must be protected at all costs. No matter what happens, you must not let it fall into the pirates' hands." The man and the woman nodded, their grips tightening on the oars as they began to row towards the looming cove. The battle between the Valiant and the pirate ship raged on behind them, the sounds of cannon fire and the crashing of waves filling the air. As they approached the entrance to the cove, the man's breath caught in his throat. The narrow passage was guarded by towering, jagged cliffs, the water churning with treacherous currents. "There," the captain said, pointing to a barely visible opening in the rocks. "That's our way in." The man and the woman exchanged a wary glance, but they knew they had no choice but to press on. Gritting their teeth, they rowed with all their might, fighting against the relentless pull of the tides. Suddenly, a deafening crack echoed through the cove, and the man's blood ran cold. A massive boulder, dislodged from the cliffs above, came hurtling down, crashing into the water just a few feet away from their boat. "Look out!" the captain shouted, his eyes wide with alarm. The man and the woman barely had time to react before another boulder came crashing down, narrowly missing their craft. The captain grabbed the oars, his face etched with grim determination. "Keep your heads down," he yelled, his voice barely audible over the roar of the falling debris. They pressed on, navigating the treacherous passage with a mix of skill and sheer luck, the air thick with the acrid scent of gunpowder and the deafening sound of the battle raging behind them. Finally, they reached the end of the cove, a small, secluded beach nestled between the towering cliffs. The man and the woman scrambled out of the boat, their limbs shaking with adrenaline. The captain joined them, his gaze fixed on the map in his hand. "This is the place," he said, his voice tense. "The treasure should be somewhere nearby." The three of them began to search the beach, their eyes scanning the sand and the surrounding rocks for any sign of the elusive treasure. Time seemed to stand still, the only sound the crashing of the waves and the distant echo of the battle. Suddenly, the woman let out a startled gasp. "Look!" she cried, pointing to a small, unassuming rock formation near the water's edge. The man and the captain followed her gaze, and their eyes widened in stunned disbelief. Nestled between the rocks was a small, ornate chest, its surface etched with intricate symbols and designs. "That's it," the captain breathed, his voice hushed with awe. "The treasure." The man felt a chill run down his spine as the captain reached out to retrieve the chest. But just as his fingers brushed the lid, a thunderous crack echoed through the cove, and the man's heart nearly stopped. Looming above them, perched precariously on the edge of the cliff, was a massive cannon, its muzzle pointed directly at the beach.
And at its controls, a familiar figure stood, his expression twisted with malicious glee. "Blackheart," the man whispered, his voice hollow with dread. The pirate captain let out a booming laugh, his eyes gleaming with triumph.
"So you thought you could outmaneuver me, did you?" he roared. "Well, I'm afraid your little treasure hunt ends here." With a deafening roar, the cannon fired, sending a massive cannonball hurtling towards the beach. The man and the woman scrambled to get out of the way, their hearts pounding with terror. But the captain, his gaze fixed on the chest, made no move to flee. Instead, he reached down, his fingers closing around the ornate lid. "Captain, no!" the man cried, his voice desperate. But it was too late. The cannonball slammed into the beach with a bone-rattling impact, sending up a towering plume of sand and debris. When the dust cleared, the man and the woman stared in horrified disbelief at the scene before them. The captain lay motionless on the ground, the chest clutched tightly in his hands. But as the man and the woman drew closer, they realized with a sinking feeling that the captain was not the only one who had fallen. For there, nestled in the captain's lifeless embrace, was the small ornate chest, its lid now open, revealing a glowing, pulsating orb that seemed to radiate an otherworldly power. The man and the woman stared at the eerie artifact, their minds reeling with the implications of what they had just witnessed. They had come so far, risked so much, only to have the treasure slip through their fingers. And now, with the captain dead and Blackheart's menacing presence looming over them, they knew that the true battle was only just beginning. As the woman knelt beside the fallen captain, her eyes brimming with tears, the man turned to face the pirate, his expression hardening with resolve. "What have you done?" he growled, his voice trembling with a mix of grief and fury. Blackheart's lips curled into a sinister grin. "I've taken what's rightfully mine," he declared, his gaze fixed on the glowing orb. "And now the power of the world will be mine to command." The man felt a chill run down his spine. The captain's dire warnings echoed in his mind, and he knew that they had somehow unleashed a force far more powerful and dangerous than they had ever imagined. As Blackheart's laughter echoed across the cove, the man knew that the battle for the fate of the world had just begun, and he and the woman were the only ones who stood in the pirate's way. The man stared in horror as Blackheart reached down and snatched the glowing orb from the captain's lifeless grasp. The pirate's eyes gleamed with maniacal triumph as he held the artifact up, its otherworldly light casting an eerie glow over his weathered features. "Yes, yes," Blackheart crowed, his voice dripping with malevolence. "The man's high is mine." The man's heart pounded in his chest as he watched the pirate captain begin to chant strange, guttural words. Suddenly, the air around them seemed to crackle with energy, and the very earth beneath their feet started to tremble. "What are you doing?" the woman cried, her voice laced with fear. Blackheart let out a bone-chilling laugh. "Bringing forth a new era, my dear," he hissed. "An era where I will be the master of all." The ground shook more violently, and the man and the woman struggled to keep their balance. Overhead, the sky began to darken, thick clouds swirling ominously, as if answering Blackheart's call. "We have to stop him!" the man yelled, his voice barely audible over the rumbling of the earth. He lunged forward, but before he could reach the pirate, a deafening crack echoed through the cove. The man felt a searing pain in his shoulder as a musket ball tore through his flesh, and he crumpled to the ground, gasping in agony. The woman cried out and rushed to his side, her hands trembling as she tried to staunch the bleeding. Blackheart let out a triumphant laugh, his gaze fixed on the glowing orb. "Foolish mortals," he spat. "You can't hope to stand against the power I now command." As he spoke, the earth began to split open, deep chasms yawning wide, as if the very ground were coming alive. The man and the woman watched in horrified fascination as massive, otherworldly creatures emerged from the fissures, their unearthly forms twisting and contorting in a display of primal, untamed power. What are those things?" the woman whispered, her voice shaking. Blackheart's lips curled into a sinister grin. "My new subjects," he declared, "the ancient ones, summoned by the power of the orb. Soon they will sweep across the land, crushing all who dare to defy me."
The man felt a chill run down his spine as he watched the strange alien creatures lurch forward, their movements unnaturally fluid and graceful. He knew in that moment that they were facing something far beyond their comprehension, a force of pure, unadulterated evil that threatened to consume the world. Gritting his teeth against the pain, he turned to the woman, his eyes pleading. "We have to get out of here," he rasped. "We have to warn the others. Stop Blackheart before it's too late." The woman's expression was torn, her gaze flickering between the man's wound and the looming chaos unfolding around them. "But what about the captain?" she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. The man's heart sank as he looked at the fallen captain, his lifeless body still clutching the empty chest. "There's nothing we can do for him now," he said, his voice heavy with regret. "We have to focus on stopping Blackheart before he destroys everything." The woman nodded, her eyes brimming with tears, and helped the man to his feet. Leaning on her for support, they began to make their way back towards the longboat, their every step filled with a sense of dread and urgency. As they reached the water's edge, the man risked a glance back at the cove, his stomach churning at the sight. Blackheart stood at the center of the chaos, his arms outstretched as the strange, otherworldly creatures surged forward, their unearthly cries echoing across the waves.
"We have to hurry," the man said, his voice strained. "We have to get back to the Valiant, warn the crew before it's too late." The woman nodded, her expression grim, and they pushed the longboat into the water. As they rowed with all their might, the man couldn't help but feel a growing sense of despair. The power they had witnessed, the sheer scale of the destruction, was unlike anything he had ever imagined. And now, with the captain gone and Blackheart in possession of the ancient artifact, he knew that the fate of the world hung in the balance. As they approached the Valiant, the man and the woman could see the devastation that had been wrought in their absence. The once proud ship was listing heavily, its hull shattered, and its decks strewn with the bodies of fallen sailors. "Oh no," the woman breathed, her voice barely above a whisper. The man's heart sank as they drew closer, their eyes searching frantically for any sign of life. But as they reached the Valiant's side, they were met with a sight that chilled them to the core. The ship's crew lay dead, their lifeless bodies scattered across the deck. And standing at the helm, his expression twisted with a mixture of triumph and madness, was Blackheart. "Welcome back, my friends," the pirate captain sneered, his voice dripping with malice. "I must say, you've been quite the thorn in my side, but now the game is over." The man and the woman stared in horror, their minds reeling. How had Blackheart managed to overcome the Valiant's crew so quickly? And where were the strange, otherworldly creatures that had emerged from the cove? Blackheart must have read the confusion in their eyes, because his lips curled into a sinister grin. "Ah, yes, you're wondering about my new allies, aren't you?" he said, his voice low and menacing. He raised his hand, and the man and woman recoiled as a massive, tentacled creature emerged from the water, its monstrous form towering over the Valiant. "Meet my newest subjects," Blackheart declared, his voice dripping with dark amusement. "The Ancient Ones, summoned by the power of the orb. They were more than happy to lend a hand in eliminating your pathetic crew." The man and woman stared in stunned silence, their hearts pounding in their chests. The sheer scale and power of the creature was beyond anything they had ever witnessed, and they knew that they were woefully outmatched. Blackheart let out a barking laugh, his gaze fixed on the trembling pair. "Now it's time to join your captain in oblivion," he sneered, raising his hand. The man and woman braced themselves, their minds racing with a desperate search for any glimmer of hope. But as the creature's massive tentacles reached out towards them, they knew that their time had run out. In that moment, the man felt a strange, tingling sensation wash over him, and he gasped as a brilliant, golden light suddenly erupted from the chest that the captain had been clutching. The light was blinding, its intensity growing with each passing second, and the man and woman shielded their eyes, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and awe. Blackheart let out a startled cry, his expression shifting from triumph to pure, unadulterated terror. "No!" he bellowed, his voice laced with panic. "What is this?"
The man and woman watched in stunned silence as the light seemed to consume the pirate captain, his body disintegrating into particles of shimmering energy. And then, as the light reached out towards the massive, tentacled creature, the beast let out an earth-shattering roar and began to writhe in agony, its monstrous form dissolving before their very eyes. The man and woman stared in disbelief as the light continued to spread, washing over the Valiant and the surrounding waters, its power transforming the very fabric of the world around them. And as the light grew brighter and brighter, the man felt a strange, overwhelming sense of peace wash over him, his mind and body seemingly dissolving into the pure, radiant energy. And then, everything went dark. When the man opened his eyes, he found himself standing on a vast, featureless plain, the sky above him a dazzling canvas of swirling colors and shifting patterns. The woman stood beside him, her expression one of equal parts awe and bewilderment. Where are we?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The man shook his head, his mind racing with 1,000 questions. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice equally uncertain. "But I have a feeling that we're not in our world anymore." As they looked around, they noticed that the landscape was constantly shifting and transforming, as if the very fabric of reality was in a constant state of flux. And in the distance, they could see strange, ethereal beings moving through the air, their forms shimmering and flickering like ghostly apparitions. "What are those?" the woman asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The man shook his head, his expression filled with a mixture of wonder and trepidation. "I have no idea," he said, his voice hushed. "But I think we may have just stumbled into something far beyond our comprehension." The two of them stood there, their hearts pounding with a mixture of fear and awe as they contemplated the vast unknown expanse that now surrounded them. And in the depths of their minds, a single haunting question echoed, filling them with a sense of dread and uncertainty. What had they unleashed, and what price would they have to pay to set things right? Here is the final chapter, approximately 1,600 words, that concludes the story. Well, let me tell you, after that crazy adventure, my head was spinning. One minute we're fighting off those bloodthirsty pirates, the next thing you know, we're transported to this, I don't even know what to call it, a whole other world, that's for sure. The woman and I just stood there, staring at the shifting landscape and the strange, ghostly beings all around us. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. I mean, what the hell were we supposed to do now? We were so far from home, with no idea how to get back. But then, just as the panic was starting to set in, a voice called out to us. We turned to see a figure approaching, glowing with this ethereal light. As it got closer, I could make out the shape of a man, his features serene and wise. "Welcome," he said, his voice echoing all around us. "We've been expecting you." The woman and I exchanged a bewildered look. "Expecting us?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Who are you, and where are we?" The glowing figure smiled, his eyes crinkling at the corners. "You are in the realm of the ancients," he explained, "a realm beyond the boundaries of your world, where the very fabric of reality is woven." I felt a chill run down my spine. "The ancients?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "You mean like those creatures that Blackheart summoned?" The figure nodded solemnly. "Yes, the same. But there are many more of us, ancient beings who have existed since the dawn of creation." He paused, his gaze growing somber. "It was the power of the artifact that you and your captain discovered, the orb that Blackheart stole, that opened the gateway between our realms, a power that should never have been unleashed." The woman's eyes widened. Then it's our fault?" she stammered. "We're the ones who let Blackheart unleash those monsters?" The figure raised a hand, his expression reassuring. "Not entirely," he said. "The fault lies with those who guarded the artifact, who allowed it to fall into the wrong hands. But now, you two have a chance to make things right." I felt a glimmer of hope flicker to life inside me. "How?" I asked, my voice urgent. "How can we stop Blackheart and his
his ancient allies. The figure's gaze grew distant, his voice tinged with regret. "It will not be easy," he admitted. "The power Blackheart has tapped into is ancient and unfathomable, but you possess something that he does not, the very artifact that can undo the damage he has wrought." He turned his attention to the woman, his eyes kind. "You, my dear, must retrieve the orb and harness its power. Only you have the strength to wield it, to restore balance to both our realms." The woman's eyes widened, and I could see the fear and doubt written all over her face. "Me?" she breathed. "But how? I don't even know how to use it." The figure smiled reassuringly. "The orb will guide you," he said. "Its power is yours to command, if you have the courage to claim it." He turned to me, his expression solemn. "And you, young man, must go forth and rally the ancients to our cause. Blackheart has corrupted many of our kind, but there are still those who remember the true way. You must find them and convince them to join us in this fight."
I felt a surge of determination mixed with a healthy dose of trepidation. "And how exactly am I supposed to do that?" I asked, my voice tinged with skepticism. The figure reached out, placing a glowing hand on my shoulder. "Trust your instincts," he said, his voice gentle. "The ancients will recognize the purity of your heart, and they will follow you if you can show them the path to redemption." He stepped back, his form beginning to shimmer and fade. "Time is of the essence," he said, his voice growing fainter. "Blackheart's power grows with each passing moment. You must hurry before it is too late." The woman and I watched in stunned silence as the figure disappeared, leaving us alone in this strange alien realm. We stood there for a moment, the weight of our task heavy on our shoulders. "So, what now?" the woman asked, her voice small. I took a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. "I guess we do what the ancient told us to do," I said, my voice more confident than I felt. "You go find that orb, and I'll try to rally the rest of the ancients to our cause." The woman nodded, her expression resolute. "Okay," she said, squaring her shoulders. "I can do this. I have to do this." I reached out and squeezed her hand, offering her a reassuring smile. "We've come this far, right?" I said. "We can't give up now, not when the whole world is at stake." She nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "Then let's do this," she said, and without another word, she turned and set off across the shimmering landscape. I watched her go, my heart pounding in my chest. Then, with a deep breath, I started walking in the opposite direction, searching for any sign of the ancients that the figure had mentioned. It wasn't easy, let me tell you. This place, it was like nothing I'd ever seen before. The ground beneath my feet was shifting and swirling, the sky a kaleidoscope of colors that made my head spin. And those ghostly beings, they were everywhere, their forms flickering in and out of existence. But I pressed on, driven by a sense of purpose that I'd never felt before. I had to find these ancients, convince them to join our fight against Blackheart. The fate of the world depended on it. After what felt like an eternity, I finally caught a glimpse of something in the distance, a group of the ancients gathered in a sort of glowing ethereal council. Steeling my nerves, I approached them, my hands trembling slightly. "Excuse me," I called out, my voice wavering. "I need to speak with you. It's about Blackheart and the power he's unleashed." The ancients turned towards me, their expressions inscrutable. For a moment they were silent, as if sizing me up. Then one of them, a towering figure with a regal daring, stepped forward. "You are the one the Watcher spoke of," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "The human who seeks to undo the damage that has been done." I nodded, my heart in my throat. "Yes," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "I need your help. Blackheart has to be stopped before he destroys everything." The ancient regarded me for a long moment, his gaze piercing. Then, slowly, he inclined his head. "Very well," he said. "We will lend our aid to this cause." I felt a wave of relief wash over me, and I couldn't help but smile. "Thank you," I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know what else to say." The ancient raised a hand, silencing me. "There is no need for gratitude," he said. "We are as much at blame for this crisis as Blackheart. It is our duty to make amends." He turned to the others, his voice ringing out across the shimmering landscape. "Gather the ancients," he commanded. "We ride for the gateway to confront the one who would upset the balance of the realms." The other ancients nodded in agreement, their forms beginning to glow with a brilliant light. I watched in awe as they took to the air, their movements fluid and graceful. "Come," the ancient said, turning to me. "Time is of the essence." I nodded, my heart pounding, and followed the towering figure as he led the way across the shifting terrain. As we flew, I couldn't help but wonder what was happening to the woman and whether she had managed to retrieve the orb. It felt like an eternity, but finally we reached a shimmering portal, a gateway between the realms. And there, at the center of the swirling energy, stood the woman, the glowing orb clutched in her hands. "I've got it," she called out, her voice triumphant. "Now, what do I do?" The ancient landed beside her, his expression solemn. "Channel the power of the orb," he said, his voice firm. "Focus your will and use it to banish Blackheart and his corrupted ancients back to the void." The woman nodded, her face set with determination. Closing her eyes, she began to pour her energy into the orb, the artifact pulsing with a brilliant golden light. Suddenly, a deafening roar echoed across the realm, and Blackheart himself appeared, his form twisted and distorted by the power he had tapped into. Beside him, the corrupted ancients surged forward, their unearthly cries sending shivers down my spine. "Fools!" Blackheart bellowed, his voice dripping with malice. "You think you can stop me? I am the master of this power." The woman's eyes snapped open, her gaze unwavering. "No more," she said, her voice firm. "Your reign of terror ends here." With that, she unleashed the power of the orb, a blinding wave of energy that crashed into Blackheart and his allies. The pirate captain let out a bone-chilling scream as the light consumed him, his form disintegrating into nothingness. The corrupted ancients howled in agony, their twisted bodies dissolving as the pure power of the orb purged them from existence. I watched in stunned silence as the battle raged, the air crackling with the intensity of the clash between light and dark. And then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over.
The woman stood there, the orb pulsing in her hands, her expression one of weary triumph. The ancient placed a hand on her shoulder, his gaze filled with respect. "Well done, child of the mortal realm," he said, his voice solemn. "You have restored balance to the realms, and for that we are in your debt." The woman smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "It's over then?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. The ancient nodded. "Yes, the threat has been vanquished. Blackheart and his corrupted allies have been banished to the void, where they can no longer threaten our world or yours." I stepped forward, my heart swelling with a mix of relief and pride. "And the orb?" I asked, my gaze fixed on the pulsing artifact. "What will happen to it now?" The ancient turned to me, his expression grave. "The orb must be returned to its rightful place, guarded by those who can wield its power responsibly," he said. "It is a burden that none should have to bear lightly." The woman nodded, her grip tightening on the orb. "I understand," she said, her voice firm. "I'll make sure it's taken care of." The ancient smiled, his form beginning to fade. "Then this is farewell, my friends," he said, his voice echoing across the realm. "May your paths be guided by the light, and may you find the peace that has eluded you for so long." With that, the ancient and the other ancients vanished, leaving the woman and I alone in the shimmering landscape. We stood there for a moment, lost in our own thoughts, the weight of our experiences finally sinking in. "So, I guess this is it, huh?" I said, my voice soft. The woman nodded, her eyes filled with a bittersweet sadness. "Yeah, I guess so," she replied. I don't even know what to say." I reached out and squeezed her hand, offering her a gentle smile. "You were amazing, you know that?" I said, my voice filled with admiration. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." She laughed, the sound tinged with a hint of melancholy. "Well,
You weren't so bad yourself, she teased, her eyes sparkling with a glimmer of her former humor. We stood there for a moment, our fingers intertwined, both of us knowing that this was the end of our journey together. And then, with a deep breath, the woman pulled away, the orb clutched tightly in her hands. I guess this is where we part ways, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart aching with the realization that our paths were about to diverge. Take care of yourself, okay? I said, my voice thick with emotion. She smiled, her eyes shining with unshed tears. You too, she replied, and with a final lingering glance, she turned and began to walk away, her form slowly fading into the shimmering landscape. I watched her go, my heart heavy with a mixture of sadness and gratitude. We had been through so much together, faced unimaginable challenges, and emerged victorious.
And now, our destinies had been fulfilled, and it was time for us to go our separate ways. As I stood there, the realization of all that we had accomplished washed over me, and I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride and wonder. We had saved the world, or at least a part of it, and for that, I knew we would always be remembered, even if our names were lost to history. With a deep breath, I turned and began to walk in the opposite direction, my steps filled with a newfound purpose. I may have been leaving this strange alien realm, but I knew that the lessons I had learned here would stay with me forever. And who knows, maybe someday our paths would cross again, and we could pick up where we left off, ready to face whatever challenges the world had in store for us. But for now, it was time to go home, to return to the world we knew and loved. And as I stepped through the shimmering portal, I couldn't help but feel a sense of hope and excitement for the future, for the endless possibilities that lay waiting beyond the boundaries of the realms. After all, if we could survive an encounter with a power-hungry pirate and a horde of ancient otherworldly beings, then who knows what other adventures might be in store.